The wind came down off the high country like a lonesome hymn, dragging the smell of snow behind it. Grace Fairfield stepped from the stage at the edge of a Wyoming town so small the sign had to clear its throat to say, population 342. Year was 1876. She held a tired carpetbag and a prayer that the past, loud as a brass band back in Philadelphia, wouldn't follow her this far. Sun lay stretched long across the false fronts of stores and the one sad saloon, painting the street the color of old tobacco. She crossed to the hotel, a plain building with clean windows and a bell that had lost most of its ring. The woman at the counter looked her over with the kind of kindness that doesn't need words. "You'll be the teacher," the lady said, ledger open and ready. "Name's Alma Jenkins. Mayor told me to see you right." "Grace Fairfield," she answered, offering a city-soft hand to a frontier palm. The key to room 3 slid her way, along with a promise of supper at 6. The room upstairs wore a patchwork quilt in the good smell of soap. She set out a small photograph of 2 faces she loved and could no longer touch, then washed the dust from her throat and gathered herself for whatever came next. Alma kept her word about supper. At a corner table sat a barrel-chested man in a decent coat, a ring of authority on his finger and mustard on his cuff. "Walter Campbell," he said when he stood, grin as big as the territory. "Mayor, for my sins. Glad you made it, Miss Fairfield." They talked terms while plates steamed. One schoolroom, 30 or so young'uns, pay enough to keep wood in the stove and food in the cupboard. The cabin that came with the job stood near the cottonwoods on the west edge of town. Grace nodded, feeling that steady ache behind her ribs soften a notch. Teaching had been her one unbroken plank. It might carry her here too. The hotel door opened to dusk, and a man shaped by weather. Broad shoulders, hat brim pulled low. A boy of 6 clung to his hand, eyes blue as glacier water. "Evening, Mayor," the man said, voice like gravel rolled in the honey. "Logan, Mitchell, brought my boy for supplies." "Then meet our new teacher," the mayor boomed, "Miss Fairfield." Mitchell tipped his hat. "Ma'am." Grace held his gaze a breath longer than manners demanded, caught by the quiet in him. The child stared like boys do when they see something bright. "You're real pretty," he blurted. "Are you an angel?" Mitchell cleared his throat. "Billy." "It's quite all right," Grace said, smiling so the boy could stop feeling wrong. His face changed with the smile. Dirt and all, he was handsome as hope. They sat a while. Mitchell ate like a man who worked for every bite careful and neat. He asked few questions, but the ones he asked had weight. She told him she'd come for adventure and for the classroom. He didn't call her a liar, but his eyes did their thinking. Billy asked where her husband was. Grace told him there wasn't one. The room cooled a touch when the boy said his mother lived in heaven. 3 years, Mitchell added, soft and final, like a fence post driven deep. When father and son stood to go, Billy bowed. Someone had taught him, and taught him well. "Will you tell us stories at school?" he asked. "Pa's got good ones, but I need to learn reading." "We'll make a bargain," Grace said. "I'll tell stories, and you'll learn to read your own." They left in the purple light, 2 silhouettes that fit together. Next morning she walked her small cabin, tapped the walls, listened to the stout little place answer back. She swept the schoolhouse till the dust surrendered, lined up slates and readers, and prayed for obedient children and a merciful bell. Sunday brought the town to its white church like cattle to water. She sat toward the back, watching faces sort themselves into names. Mitchell and Billy were there, the boy fidgeting until his father's hand settled him like a blanket. Women greeted Mitchell with smiles that lingered. Grace noticed, then told herself not to. After the service, the churchyard filled with handshakes and pie talk. Billy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Can I show Miss Fairfield my pony?" Mitchell looked apologetic, then proud. "First horse of his own," he said. "Dun color. Thinks the world of it." Grace admired the pony and the name, Butterscotch, chosen for candy and good sense. Praise put another inch on Billy's height. "You'll come to supper sometime?" he asked, eyes shining. "Pa cooks beans." "If your father invites me properly," she teased, gentle as a warm breeze. Mitchell tipped his hat again, a little less formal. "You'd be welcome at the Circle L, Miss Fairfield." He hesitated. "Grace, if that sits better." "It does," she said, and his mouth found the beginning of a smile. The first day of school rose bright and cool. Children came by boot leather and wagon wheel, from 5 to nearly grown. Grace arranged them by what their eyes already knew and what their hands could learn. Billy Logan brought her an apple shining enough to see a future in. "Pa says teachers like apples," he explained. She made it official that she did. Mitchell lingered at the back, hat in his hands. "He's been up since before dawn," he murmured. "Couldn't wait." "Then we'll put that eagerness to work," she answered. The day held steady until it didn't. On the walk to the general store, a drunk stumbled out of the saloon, tongue sour and mean. Grace put herself between the man and the child without any speech about it. Mrs. Henderson came swinging a broom and sent the trouble back to where he got it. Billy's hand found Grace's. It fit there. Mitchell turned up just as the last echo of trouble died. He looked from the saloon to Grace, jaw tight. She told him it was finished. He walked them to the schoolhouse anyway, leading his horse and listening to his boy talk about slates and numbers. At the door, he met Grace's gaze and said, "Saturday, supper. I'll send the wagon at 4. She nodded before her better cautions could speak. After they rode away, she stood with a quiet she hadn't known in years and felt something unfamiliar settle inside her, warm as a hearth. Out on the far hills, clouds were stacking like hay bales. Saturday wasn't far, and storms, of one kind or another, had a way of arriving early. Saturday rode in on a breath of wind and the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Grace dressed in her best calico, tied her hair back with a ribbon that used to mean something to someone else, and waited by the gate of her little cabin. When the wagon rolled up, Mitchell sat on the bench seat, reins loose in one hand. Billy perched beside him, holding a jar of wildflowers that looked like sunshine in a bottle. "Ma'am," Mitchell said, touching his hat, "hope you don't mind a bumpy road. It's honest, at least." Grace smiled. "I'll try not to complain." They rumbled west toward the open country. Grassland stretched out like a sea of gold, and the Logan Ranch came into view, a sturdy house standing against 1,000 miles of wind. The place carried a feeling of hard work and quiet pride. The fence lines were straight, the barn roof patched with care, and a collie pup came barking as they pulled in. "Pa fixed that roof twice last winter," Billy bragged, hopping down. "Snow near broke it." "I can see," Grace said, taking in the neat rows of stacked wood and the porch swept clean. You've both built something fine here." Mitchell unloaded the wagon, shoulders working beneath his shirt, movements sure but unhurried. "Took time," he said. "Lost a few cattle to the cold. Lost some sleep, too. But the land gives back what you respect." Grace found herself watching him a bit too long, until Billy's laughter snapped her out of it. The boy was chasing the pup through the yard, his joy cutting through the distance between the three of them. Inside the supper table waited with beans, biscuits, and coffee so strong it could chase off the night. Grace offered to help, but Mitchell shook his head. "You're our guest. Been too long since we had company worth having." They ate slow, talking about small things that somehow felt large. The stubborn weather, the new school, a coyote that stole a hen last week. Billy told stories about trying to teach the pup tricks, and Grace laughed softly, the sound surprising even her. Mitchell watched her in the flicker of the lamp, eyes steady and warm. After the meal, Billy wandered off to show her his drawing of a horse that looked more like a mountain goat, but Grace praised it anyway. When the boy went to bed, Mitchell poured 2 cups of coffee and carried them out to the porch. "Town's been talking," he said, after a long silence, voice low enough to keep the words between them. "They say you came west for a reason." Grace looked out toward the dark horizon. They're right. I came to start over. Left behind more noise than a woman ought to." "Noise?" She hesitated. "Philadelphia doesn't forgive easy. I taught at a school there, until a man mistook kindness for something else. When I wouldn't have him, his lies grew faster than truth could run. I packed what I had and caught the first stage out." Mitchell didn't speak right away. Then he said, "Out here we judge a person by what they do when things go wrong. You stood in front of my boy the other day. That's all I need to know." The air held that kind of quiet that feels like a promise. Grace swallowed hard, thankful for the dark that hid her tears. When thunder cracked over the hills, Mitchell looked to the sky. "Storm's coming. Best stay the night. Road'll wash out before long." She wanted to argue, but lightning stitched the horizon, and she saw he was right. Billy was already asleep. Mitchell spread a blanket near the hearth for himself and told her to take his room. Grace insisted she be fine on the settee, but the storm chose for her. A gust slammed the shutters and sent the lamp flickering. "I'll stay till morning," she whispered. Rain came in sheets, drumming on the roof like an old hymn. They sat by the fire, neither talking much. The silence between them felt safe, like 2 souls resting after a long ride. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked after a while. "Missing someone?" He stared into the flames. "You learn to carry it different. The weight don't change, just your shoulders." The fire popped, and in its light, she saw the lines of pain and patience carved across his face. Something inside her shifted, something that had been frozen for years. Later, when the storm softened to a whisper, Mitchell draped a quilt around her shoulders. Their hands brushed, and the moment hung there, gentle, unsure, real. She met his gaze, and for once, neither of them looked away. "Good night, Grace," he said. Finally, "Good night, Mitchell." When she closed her eyes that night, the sound of the rain was softer than her memories. For the first time in years, sleep came without fear. By morning, the world smelled new. Sunlight caught the puddles, turning them to mirrors of gold. Grace helped fry eggs while Billy chattered about how thunder made him dream of stampedes. She laughed light and free while Mitchell watched from the doorway with a look she couldn't read, it felt all the same. As the wagon rolled back toward town later that morning, Grace kept glancing at the house until it disappeared behind the hills. Something about it, about them, had taken root deep inside her, and out on the ridge, Mitchell stood watching the trail long after she was gone, hat in hand, wondering why goodbye suddenly felt like the wrong word. Days drifted by slow as molasses, marked by the rhythm of the school bell and the whisper of chalk across the board. The children grew fond of Miss Fairfield, though none more than little Billy Logan. He'd stay behind after class, sweeping the floor or stacking slates, always finding one more reason to linger. Pa says a man finishes what he starts, he'd tell her with that gap-toothed grin. So I gotta finish helping you. Grace would laugh softly. Well, Mr. Logan, you make a fine helper. And when he ran off toward the ranch, Grace's eyes followed him longer than she meant them to. Each afternoon, Mitchell would ride in to meet his boy. He never said much, but his presence filled the schoolyard. The way he tipped his hat, the way his gaze softened when Billy spoke, it stirred something in Grace she'd thought long buried. But good things never walk alone out west. They bring trouble along, just to keep the balance. It started with whispers, light as dust, but dust has a way of clinging. A woman at the mercantile mentioned Grace's city scandal, and by sundown, the tale had spread across town faster than a prairie fire in a high wind. The story grew with every telling, that she'd shamed a married man, that she'd run before the law caught up. None of it true, but truth always rides a slower horse. Grace kept her chin up through it all. She taught, smiled, and pretended the stares didn't sting. But that night, alone in her cabin, the tears came anyway, quiet, so no one could hear. The next morning, when Mitchell came by for Billy, he noticed her eyes. Something happened? He asked, voice low. Just gossip, she said, forcing a smile. This town needs news stories. Mitchell frowned. Names? No, let it pass. But he wasn't the kind to let things pass. That evening, he found Harlan Tate leaning against the saloon rail, a man who thrived on other people's misery. Heard you been talking, Mitchell said, stepping close enough that the boards creaked beneath his boots. Harlan sneered. Just repeating what folks say. Maybe you should ask your precious teacher what she's hiding. Mitchell's jaw tightened. You say her name again, and I'll make sure you can't. The threat wasn't loud, but men in earshot heard it clear. Harlan looked away first. By the next morning, the talk had quieted, though not gone. Mitchell didn't tell Grace what he'd done. She just noticed the way people greeted her with a bit more caution, and how his eyes seemed to hold something unspoken when they met hers. Then winter crept in early. Frost drew lace on the windows, and the sky turned pale as pewter. One afternoon, as the last of her students bundled up to head home, the wind began to howl. Mitchell arrived with the wagon, coat dusted white. Storm's rolling in fast, he warned. Best close the school and ride with us. Grace hesitated, looking at the thick gray clouds, swallowing the ridge. If I stay, I'll be fine. No, ma'am, he said firmly. This one's meaner than it looks. By the time they reached the ranch, snow was falling sideways, thick as wool. Billy's laughter filled the air as they rushed inside, boots dripping, cheeks flushed. The warmth of the hearth wrapped around them, and Grace couldn't help but smile. Mitchell stoked the fire higher. You'll have to stay the night, he said, Road'll vanish before dark." "I seem to be making a habit of that," she replied, cheeks warming faster than the fire. They shared stew, thick with venison and potatoes, and for a while the world outside vanished beneath the storm. Billy nodded off near the fire, head on her shoulder. She brushed a hand through his hair, heart tightening when he murmured, "Don't go, Miss Grace. Please don't go." When Mitchell looked over, the sight hit him hard. "He's taken to you," he said quietly, "and I to him," she admitted. "He's a fine boy." "Best part of me," he answered, "the only part that still believes in good." The silence stretched, soft but full. Grace looked into the fire, seeing more than flames, seeing hope she buried. Outside, the wind screamed like a living thing, shaking the windows. Grace shivered, and Mitchell rose, pulling another quilt from the peg. He wrapped it around her shoulders, fingers brushing her hair. "Thank you," she whispered. "Oh, don't thank me," he said. "Just stay warm." They stood close, too close, and when she lifted her eyes, he was right there, steady and sure. The distance between them vanished, and for the first time since she left the city, Grace forgot the past. His kiss was slow, careful, the kind that asks permission and gives more than it takes. When they parted, both were breathless. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Don't be," he said. "Some things just find their way." Thunder rumbled far off, and the storm began to ease. Grace looked at him through the flicker of firelight, realizing how dangerous hope could be, and how sweet. That night, when Billy stirred in his sleep and called her name, she soothed him, whispering promises she didn't yet understand. And Mitchell, lying awake on the floor nearby, listened to her voice like a prayer he hadn't known he'd been waiting for. The morning would come clear and cold, but nothing between them would be the same again. The storm broke before dawn, leaving the land hushed beneath a blanket of white. The air outside the Logan house smelled like clean earth and second chances. Grace woke to the crackle of the hearth and the faint rattle of dishes from the kitchen. Billy's laughter drifted in, light as sunlight after rain. "Miss Grace, we made pancakes," he called. She smiled, pulling on her shawl and stepping into the kitchen. Mitchell stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair still damp from washing. "He did most of it," he said, nodding toward Billy, who proudly held a plate of slightly burnt pancakes. "Then I'll eat every bite," she said, warmly. They sat together at the table, the kind of breakfast that didn't need fine manners, just warmth. Billy chattered about building snowmen and catching flakes on his tongue. Grace listened, her heart caught somewhere between joy and fear, because it felt too good, too much like belonging. When the storm cleared completely, she gathered her coat. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the shelter and everything else." Mitchell followed her to the door. "You're welcome, Grace." His tone held more weight than two simple words should. "Roads'll be rough, but you'll make it back by noon. I'll send Billy with the wagon." She shook her head. You've done enough." He hesitated, eyes tracing her face like he was memorizing it. "You sure you'll be all right?" "I'm tougher than I look," she answered, and then without meaning to, they both laughed. It was a quiet sound, shy, honest, the kind that carried more than words. By the time Grace returned to town, whispers were waiting for her again. Someone had seen her wagon trail leading west before the storm. Someone else claimed she'd spent the night under a rancher's roof. She tried to ignore it, But the way women looked at her in the mercantile, the way the pastor's wife pressed her lips tight, it all landed heavy. That night, she sat alone by her lamp, turning her locket over in her hand. It held no picture now, just a curl of old ribbon and a dream she'd stopped believing in. The next day, Mitchell rode into town to settle accounts at the feed store. He could feel it the moment he stepped off his horse. Silence where there used to be greetings. Harlan Tate leaned against the post again, smirking. "Seems your school marm forgot her manners," he said. "Spent the storm at your place, did she?" Mitchell's jaw worked once. Then his voice came slow and level, like a warning from a deep well. "You've got a choice, Harlan. You keep her name out of your mouth, or you pick your teeth out of the dirt." The man's smirk wavered. "Wasn't meaning no harm." "Then best you remember that," Mitchell said, stepping closer. "This town's got room for a lot of things. Cowards ain't one of them." When he left, no one spoke. Even the piano in the saloon went quiet for a beat. That evening, he rode straight to the schoolhouse, dust and snow still clinging to his coat. Grace was closing up, the last light of day painting her hair gold. "I heard what they're saying," she began, voice shaking just enough to break his heart. "You don't have to defend me, Mitchell. It'll only make things worse." He stepped closer. "They don't get to talk about you like that. You've done nothing wrong." "Maybe not," she said, "but gossip doesn't care about truth. And you have your reputation to think of." He gave a low, bitter laugh. "Grace, the only reputation I've got is the one I built with sweat and loss. Folks can take it if they need to, but they won't take you." Her breath caught. "Mitchell, please." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'm not good with words. Never was. But I know what I feel when I see you with Billy. When I hear you laugh, it feels like coming home." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "Don't," she whispered, "don't say things you can't mean." "I mean every word," he said simply. "I just don't know if you're ready to hear them." Grace turned away, heart pounding. "I'm not," she admitted. "Not yet." He nodded, slow and respectful, the way a man does when he knows patience might be his only chance. "Then I'll wait. I've waited through winters worse than this." He tipped his hat and left her standing there in the fading light, watching the dust settle where his horse had been. That night, she dreamed of wide fields and laughter echoing in a house she didn't yet own. And far out on the prairie, Mitchell looked up at the same stars, whispering to the quiet, "I can wait, Grace. I surely can." Weeks passed. Snow melted. The earth began to breathe again. One morning, Billy came to school carrying a tiny bouquet of prairie flowers. "Miss Grace," he said, standing straighter than usual, "Pa says spring means new beginnings. So, can you come for supper again? Please." Grace smiled despite herself. "You tell your pa I said yes." When the boy left, she sat down, the flowers trembling in her hand. Something was changing, steady and certain as the seasons, and for the first time, she didn't fight it. The second supper at the ranch felt different from the first, not because the table held better food or brighter light, but because the silence between them had turned soft. It no longer felt like distance. It felt like peace. Grace sat across from Mitchell and Billy, her heart steady and open, though she still feared what tomorrow might bring. They talked about small things, how the cattle were faring, How Billy was learning to read faster than his pa ever did. How spring rains were kind this year. Every word carried warmth, the kind that wraps around a weary soul and makes it believe in home again. After the meal, they stepped out onto the porch. The moon rode high, painting silver over the land. Coyotes yipped somewhere out on the ridge, their voices carrying far and lonely. Billy leaned against Grace's side, his eyelids heavy. "Miss Grace," he murmured, "Pa says heaven's got angels. I think maybe you came from there." She smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart. I just came from a long road." "Then don't go back," the boy said, and before she could answer, he added the words that broke her. "Can you be my mama?" The night went still. The wind quieted. The crickets hushed. Even the world seemed to hold its breath. Grace knelt, brushing a lock of hair from Billy's forehead. Her voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. "Oh, Billy." She kissed his brow softly, the way a mother might when words are too small. "If your father agrees, I'll be proud too." Billy's grin came bright as sunrise, but before he could run inside, Mitchell's boots sounded behind them. He'd heard every word. Grace stood, her heart hammering. "Mitchell, He shook his head gently. "You don't owe me any words." He looked at his boy, then back at her. "Seems he knows what's right before I do." He stepped closer, his hat in his hands. "Grace, I don't have fancy ways or fine things. Just a patch of land and a heart that's been empty too long. But if you could see fit to fill both, I'd spend every day making sure you never regret it." For a long moment, she couldn't speak. All the hurt, all the fear that had followed her from Philadelphia, gone like morning fog. What was left was simple and true. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mitchell, I'll stay." He reached for her hand, rough and warm, and the feel of it grounded her like the roots of the old cottonwood by the creek. Billy whooped and threw his arms around them both, laughing so hard the collie began barking just to join in. Later, as the moon climbed higher, the three of them sat by the hearth. Billy fell asleep between them, curled like a kitten. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, watching the flames dance. "You think folks will still talk?" he asked. Grace smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Let 'em. They'll find someone else soon enough." He chuckled low. "Long as it ain't you, I don't mind." The fire cracked. Outside, the prairie wind hummed through the grass, carrying the scent of rain and new life. Grace looked toward the window, where the night stretched wide and endless, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Weeks turned into months. The schoolhouse filled with laughter again, the town's gossip fading like old echoes. Mitchell built a swing on the porch, and every evening Billy would beg her to push him higher, his laughter floating through the air like music. When summer came, the prairie turned green and alive. On one golden afternoon, Mitchell brought her a simple ring, silver, smooth, and shining in the sun. He didn't kneel or make speeches. He just said, "I reckon this belongs on your hand." Grace answered with a smile and tears all at once. "Reckon it does." They married under the cottonwoods, the preacher reading words that seemed to have waited just for him. The town came, curious at first, then smiling when they saw Billy holding both their hands like he planned it all along. As the vows ended, the boy tugged her sleeve and whispered, "You're really my mama now." Grace bent down and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Always, Billy, always." That evening, when the sun dropped low and painted the sky red as rust, Mitchell and Grace stood on the porch together. The land rolled out before them, wide and wild in theirs. He put an arm around her waist. "You ever missed a city?" She leaned into him. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to. The city was full of noise. This place, it listens." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Ain't that the truth?" They stayed that way until the first stars showed, the silence between them saying everything that needed saying. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called, lonely, but not sad, just alive. Grace took Mitchell's hand and gave it a squeeze. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "About the weight we carry. It doesn't get lighter. We just learn how to carry it together." He smiled, slow and sure, the way a man does when he's found his peace. "Reckon we do." And under that wide western sky, with the wind whispering through the grass and their son's sleeping sound inside, the world finally felt right.